Okay everyone, so we're back here for our final video in this Syrian civil war. This is part 3, and now talking about the survivors and refugees, and this is really now where we're getting more of a global impact, more so than we already have. Okay, so as you see the picture on the right, these are two cities in Syria, and we've seen these pictures before of what is left of where people are supposed to live. And the problem is that the land is getting absolutely destroyed and annihilated. And you can see it by the pictures I've showed you before. And then we want to add into this, and I've talked about this a little bit already, this issue of climate change. Syria is an area that you're seeing increasing drought levels. And of course, the problem with that is the inability to grow food. If you then throw on the top of that the inability to grow food and this idea of destroying every other avenue you have, of course, how are you going to trade, how are you going to get things like that in here? Where are people supposed to go? Where are people supposed to live? It's just not that easy. And so what many of people decided to do is to get out. And that's where we're having the issues. Now, here's some basic facts. Within Syria itself, there are 12 million people that have been displaced from their homes. And so not only do you have what we're going to be discussing, this refugee crisis, but you also have people within the country that are just kind of wandering around. And that leads to even more instability. And in some cases, why people are either joining revolutionary groups or even terror groups. Because think of it about this way. If a terror group is going to come up to you and say, hey, you come fight for us, and they can feed you and give you a home, and you don't have either of those, it's pretty hard to say no to that. And we're not saying that they subscribe to you know, the agenda and the extremism of these groups, but when people are put into desperate situations for survival, because the fact of the matter is most people don't want to die. And so if you're facing death or that, why wouldn't you choose that? And that's a shame because many of these people really have just lost their way. 4 million people have fled as refugees. And the bulk of those refugees, or they make up the bulk of the refugees in the world, actually taking over Afghanistan for first place. Now, something most of you don't know, most of those refugees are being taken care of within the Middle East, in Jordan, which has actually seen a 25% increase in their population because they've taken in so many refugees, Iraq, Lebanon, Turkey, and Egypt. So the other 5% are looking to go to Europe, which I'll talk about. Now, what's really kind of getting irritating here, though, is the rest of the Arab states at this point, so I am making this in November of 2015, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, and Yemen have taken none. And that is a problem. Many of these groups have actually, particularly Saudi Arabia, has spoken out against Bashar al-Assad, has sent money to revolutionary groups going against Bashar al-Assad, yet they won't take any refugees. Now, that causes some strain, but do people back off? In many cases, yes, because again, Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, UAE, Kuwait, and Yemen control a lot of oil, so we tend not to be super forceful with them. And that's also a bit of a problem as well. Now, the problem that you have here is trying to help refugees. So in 1967, because we were having so many refugees, particularly trying to get out of Eastern Europe, the United Nations passed a resolution of how every single nation must help refugees. So this is quoting from that. So, quote, a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside of the country of his nationality and is unable or, owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country. Or who, not having nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence, as a result of such events, is unable or owing to such fear, is unwilling to return to it. The reason why the Syrian refugees apply to this is that they are anti-Bashar al-Assad. Assad has a documented record of civil rights abuses and human rights abuses, and they are scared to return. Now, also in the protocols is that, and this is to just kind of summarize, that refugees must be taken care of in a human or humane way. offered protections from harm, and given opportunities to settle. The trick here, however, is that these protocols don't go into place until the refugees actually show up. So here's the idea. And as you see this guy here, when they're getting here, you see all their hands. These are a couple people arriving off the coast of Italy, but you can see how they're all packed in here and almost don't make it. So the idea is that if they get to a country, you have to take care of them. Simply put. Now, as you can see here, here's a map. So look at the mouse on the right. You see the mass amount here, and then many trying to get to Macedonia, Greece, and then working their way. Yes, Hungary has set up a fence. We'll talk about it later. And so you're looking at 2,000 daily arrivals, Macedonia, Greece, and then Italy will have quite a bit as well. So you can see the big move now is many people are here, but then the bulk are starting to work their way over to Europe. And why wouldn't you? Because there's lots more opportunities there. All right, now, many people are doing this on foot, but more and more are going by sea. And as you can see here, this is for 2015 into 2016, or 2014 into 2015, and you're looking at over 40,000 now arriving by sea to Europe, and that was just in June of this year. One of the problems that you also have here, though, are people trying to take advantage of the Syrians and basically robbing them of all their money. These are smugglers. These are people that will stash them inside these boats and other watercraft and smuggle them into Europe. But in order to do that, they basically take all their money. And many of these people have no other way. Walking to Europe from Syria is not easy. Let's go back. If I'm here, walking across all the way to here is not easily done. So now you have this basically illegal people trade of these smugglers taking advantage and putting these people in an even worse situation of now arriving with no money. But the hopes is that you can have an opportunity to at least get settled and get some food. So that's an increasing issue. And no one is really trying to crack down on these guys, which is also an issue. Now the sea is very deadly. You've got overcrowded ships. You have ships that are tipping and capsizing, and you've had many deaths. And if I hop down to this name here, Aylan Kurdi, you can feel free to look it up. I am not going to show his picture because it hurts me to see it. He was a 3-year-old boy that washed up on the shores of Turkey, dead, because of an overcrowded ship in which he ended up getting accidentally pushed overboard when the ship started to go down. And that's tragic, and that's what we need to understand is the journey that these people are going through. Now, we're going to talk about the different opinions of letting refugees in and some of the issues with that, but this is what you're starting to see. And what happens is that many nations are deliberately trying to make the journey harder. Britain, for instance, used to have a thing called Mare Nostrum that they would patrol the seas around them, and if a boat was floundering, they would help out the boat and get it to a shore, thus guaranteeing, whether it was in Britain or Italy or whatever, thus guaranteeing those people refugee status. However, what they did this year is they massively cut the program funding for Mare Nostrum, and then all of a sudden there are less people able to reach there. So that's what some nations have started to secretly do, is to patrol and not allow these guys even in, because in order to get in, or in order to be a refugee, you have to get in. Now, what are other people facing? You're looking at violence against immigrants, and we've seen this for years, and these refugees, that people are hurting them deliberately. You also are dealing with racism because of their backgrounds. There are a lot of assumptions and things we will talk about in class that these people are trying to deal with. And some of the violence is, you see here, like this is a great example. You see this woman, this was in Hungary. These people were just trying to run to get away from all these crowds, and the media was there, and she deliberately was tripping multiple people. You see he is carrying a small child, and luckily enough the child was not too injured, but the child did get hurt because he fell full down on it. Like, it's little stuff like this that is starting to add up. Now, you also have some people have been imprisoned, most notably Australia has been cited for imprisoning immigrants that they're catching offshore instead of maybe just returning them. And then you get some big anti-immigrant movements. Particularly, we're seeing in the Eastern European nations, a lot of people refusing entry or trying to pass greater immigration restrictions laws because they're calling these people immigrants, not refugees. And we're going to talk about the impact of that in a moment. So you're seeing lots of things to add on to the other thing of, remember, these people are coming from a place in which their home was destroyed. Now, well, the other problem that these refugees are facing in Europe is something called the Dublin regulations. So the way that it states is that refugees must stay in the nation they hit first until they are processed. Now the problem is that these nations aren't necessarily equipped, like I have here if you skip down a little bit, like Italy and Greece, because the idea was that if I get to Italy first, then maybe I can move to a different country. Well, according to the Dublin regulations, you can't until you are fully processed as a refugee. And if you know anything about government paperwork, it takes forever. There have been certain people that have gotten paperwork that I've actually seen, for instance, in Greece, that they will not be, they get notified of a date in which they will be fully processed. And some people have dates on there of 2019. 2019, that's 3 years, over 3 years from now. And what you add into it is that they're not allowed to work until they're properly registered. So now you're having people that have little money. Now they're going to have no money because a lot of people say that there's crime or they live in poverty. Well, they live in poverty because they're technically not allowed to work according to the Dublin regulations. So why would they have any money? Which does lead to other problems because, when people don't have money, maybe you see crime, maybe you see issues. And the thing is, a lot of these people who are coming over are actually educated and they could work if they were allowed. So even though there's a system, the idea of the 1967 protocols, the way that they're carrying those out aren't particularly the most efficient. So where are they actually even allowed to go? Germany has recently stepped up and they're going to house 35,000. Okay, and you have Ireland and the UK. I mean, this isn't really a lot here, and not a lot going over here. But Canada, the US has pledged 16,000. Brazil has pledged over 7,000. So it's rough, and that again, if there's 4 million of them, 130,000 isn't quite enough. But remember, 95% are being taken care of. So there you go. Now, the big issue here is, should nations be taking these people in? And you can tell the way that people kind of view these folks if they are a refugee or a migrant. A lot of folks are calling this a migrant crisis, which is a little kind of weird because a migrant moves from one area to another on purpose because they want to move there. A refugee is moving not because they want to move there, but because they have to move there. And I need you to understand the difference of that, okay? So folks that are call them migrants tend to not be in favor of housing refugees. And there's a variety of reasons why you wouldn't do that. Those that call them refugees tend to be pro that. So understand what we see. But the evidence points to these folks being refugees mainly because they're leaving Syria because they have to. Now, it's not an easy thing to work out because the nation that are accepting these refugees do have to shell out money. And that's something we have to take into account. Okay. One of the other big issues is that because there are terrorists, and we already talked about the prevalence of ISIS, Hezbollah, and other groups that are very prevalent in Syria, is that terror groups are using refugee camps as a way to sneak people out to do things. For instance, one of the members of the Paris attacks came through a refugee camp. So that's a legitimate thing that you have to worry about. However, if you're taking in relatively modest numbers at a time, you can perhaps get around that. But it's something that nations do have to be aware of. However, is it incredibly prevalent? Not really, being that, as we've seen, about 4 million people are starting to move, and so far you got one one terrorist. But you do need to be aware of it. Most of the rest of the people in the Paris attacks were actually European nationals, meaning that they lived in Europe and had always lived in Europe. So that's something to point out. But one of the big issues is revolving around the cost. Now, this is a little bit tricky. because this is expensive. You're trying to set these people up and you're trying to house them properly. The problem is some nations take that more seriously than others. So some places, the refugee camps can be pretty nice, or some places, like up here, last time I checked, dirty sheets, things like that, dirty tents. This is not, where's a bathroom? They're not particularly nice. So when we look at it, we have to see these nations and do they have any ability to actually take the refugees in, because they do have technically a legal responsibility to do it if they get here. Now, the United States has done very little until this recently, and now you have a variety of governors, up to I guess 30 that of our 50 states, that say they don't want any in there, although legally I'm not exactly sure if they can do that. We'll discuss it in class. But this is what I want you to do. So you're going to have your 3 questions, you're going to have your 5 comments. In addition to that, I would like you to write maybe 2 or 3 sentences on if you feel the United States should actually take some refugees in. This is all your feel, and we're actually going to use that for a discussion in class, okay? But what you can see, the refugee issue, it is not an easy issue. It is a costly issue. There are other possible dangers involved. So it's something we really have to look at all sides to understand how nations can best help. Because the one thing that you all need to understand, and I think everybody can, whether you're pro or anti taking refugees in, is that these people do need some type of help, that Syria is a complete and utter catastrophic mess, and that there's no easy solution to any of it. So I'll see you guys soon, and make sure you get that added thing in there, okay?